We can get started. Hello. Ooh, that worked. Hello, everybody. I am Noelle Norton. I am the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm delighted to have you all here as the Humanities Center starts its sixth and final part of our three-year exploration of the natural landscapes and human meaning. I really can't believe that it's been 3 full years. It's gone very quickly. Anyway, this series has reflected, on the whole, has reflected 6 distinct landscapes, and we can go over each of them: the ocean, the desert, the forest, frozen realms, the mountain, and now the city. So we've approached this task in a number of distinct ways. The center's gallery has each semester been home to 2 exhibitions dedicated to the landscapes theme, and deep gratitude goes to Derek Cartwright, who I don't see just now, because with his characteristic vision and energy, he has put together an extraordinary set of shows that I can see many of your faces. You have come in to see them, and I'll tell you more about the other one that's in here later. There have been a number of landscape-related classes that have been offered for our students, and here in the center, and we must thank the faculty members who have taught those: Jason Crum, Beth O'Shea, and wait, Ron and I had an argument on the way up. It's Beth O'Shea and Brian Clack. Yeah, but your name, okay, Beth O'Shea and Brian Clack, Fred Robinson, and Lisa Smith. So, and you put so much work into devising those classes. And then we also have this meaning our regular Tuesday series, in which speakers from a very wide range of disciplines offer their thoughts and expertise on aspects of each of the environment or landscapes under consideration. Dr. Clack counted these up today, and we will have 136 of these presentations altogether, and that is something that's really just in and of itself quite remarkable. An enormous thanks goes out to all of those, and I see your faces out here, many of you who have been speakers in this series, and also thank you for a variety of things, giving your time and for giving us so much to think about. It would be impossible for the Humanities Center to operate at this level, at this capacity, without the top quality work of Maggie McCrae. Where'd she go? The one time she disappeared. Maggie, we thank you in the back room. And we also have had, from the very beginning of this series, Lindy Villa. She is a fantastic assistant director of the center, and a great thanks goes out to Lindy as well. So for me, one of the most pleasing aspects of this whole endeavor has been its thoroughgoingly multidisciplinary character. We have not just thought about landscape through the lens of the arts and the humanities, but we have benefited from the splendid insights of those working in the natural sciences. And the contributions from our colleagues in the departments of biology and environmental and ocean sciences in particular have been memorable. As we move away from nature, though, and toward the built environment, we will hear more from faculty in other divisions and with other subjects. For example, and I see those faces here today too, architecture, anthropology, and sociology. And one of our 2 speakers here today is indeed from the Department of Sociology, and with that, allow me to introduce the speakers. Dr. Brian Clack, who most of you know well, is a professor of philosophy and the A. Vasiliadis Director of the Humanities Center. Since he usually does these introductions, he doesn't give his list of publications, but I get to today, so I'm going to do that. He received his PhD from King's College London and joined the faculty of USD in 2007. He's the author of 2 books on the philosophy of Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he is the author also of, as he calls it, a deeply pessimistic book called Love, Drugs, Art, Religion, The Pains and Consolation of Existence. With his sister Beverly Clack, he has co-authored the textbook, The Philosophy of Religion, A Critical Introduction. Now it's in its third edition. And with Tyler Hauer, he has published, he co-edited the substantial anthology, The Philosophy and the Human Condition, and that's published by Oxford University Press. Dr. Clack has edited Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France for the Broadview Edition series, and has most recently put together an edition of the works of the Marquis of Halifax, and that's also for the prestigious Oxford World Classics series. Okay, that's Dr. Clack. We'll go on to the next speaker, Dr. Cid Martinez. He is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology. He received his PhD from UC Berkeley, and he is a specialist in the field of urban politics and poverty, policing, gun violence, and criminology. His first book, The Neighborhood Has Its Own Rules, A Study of Conflict Management in South Los Angeles, was published in 2016 by the New York University Press. The International Criminal Justice Review described the book as a wonderful testament to the power of ethnography and street-level observations of various alternative means of violence suppression. While the Journal of Sociology of Race and Ethnicity predicted that Dr. Martinez's book would prove to be a seminal one. His newest book manuscript, on the way, is tentatively entitled Cops and Clergy, Legitimacy, Trust, and Violence Reduction, and it draws on 2 years of ethnographic research and explores how the perceived legitimacy of the local clergy can be leveraged by law enforcement to reduce violence. So, there are our speakers. Now, I'll just briefly tell you about the structure of today's session. It will go something like this. We will hear from Dr. Clack, then we'll hear from Dr. Martinez. There will be a little bit of question and answer time after that. And then I welcome you all to stay for the opening city-themed reception. This will be the last opening reception we have for this landscape series. The gallery will also be open, so you can enjoy the first of this semester's 2 exhibitions that I mentioned briefly before. This one is titled History Repeating, Ruinous Imagination from Piranesi to the President. Present. That was a Freudian slip. And now, introducing the city. Please welcome Brian Clack and Cid Martinez.
Hello. Thank you, Noel. Thank you again for everything that you've done to support this series and for the humanities at USD in general. We're hugely grateful. You're going to have to forgive me today. I'm fighting a losing battle with double pneumonia, and don't worry, I'm not in any way contagious. I've just been beaten. So I'm leaning into this microphone, and I may need to take breaks occasionally. If you can't hear me, shout at me or throw things. What I want to do here is to offer a few opening thoughts about the city and its relation to the broader landscape theme. There seems, of course, to be some kind of jarring break between what we have been exploring in previous semesters and what we are now embarked upon. The city, after all, is not a natural landscape. Those of you who have been following along since the beginning, however, will have noticed that the city has been very much hovering around in our thoughts, and it has been present largely as a point of contrast, largely as something which a natural landscape stands in opposition to, and often as the thing to be escaped from, perhaps redeemed from. And the natural has within it, perhaps, a sense of the unchanging eternal, as distinct from the changing ephemerality of the very human city. Now, a couple of examples of this might prove useful. So I want to start with this. The very titles of the first two chapters of Thomas Hardy's novel, The Return of the Native, can be seen to express this opposition. Chapter 1, titled A Face on Which Time Makes But Little Impression. This is devoted to a depiction of a particular landscape, Egdon Heath, a brooding moor, dark and implacable. Time makes little impression on its face. I quote, "The sea changed," Hardy writes. "The rivers, the villages, and the people changed, yet Egdon remained." Now, the contrast between this natural scene and human activity is sharply drawn with the title of chapter 2, which is this: "Humanity appears upon the scene, hand in hand with trouble." This is wonderful. So you have the contrast between this unchanging natural landscape and human trouble. Now, this contrast appears again in a more laconic form in the opening moments of John Ford's Western movie from 1962, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I love this movie. In the opening moments, Ransom and Hallie Stoddard, played by James Stewart and Vera Miles, return to the frontier town of Shinbone after many years away in Washington, D.C., and Hallie remarks upon the great changes and developments that have swept through this town. The response she's given by an old acquaintance is, for our purposes, telling and precise. He says, and I quote, "The railroad done that. Desert's still the same." This is brilliant. The railroad done that, but the desert is still the same. So you see, amidst all this frenetic human activity, the vain pursuit of wealth and development, the desert remains silent, waiting, eternal. We can return for a second to the idea of escaping from the city, of seeking redemption from it. This is a rather startling set of thoughts when you think about it. The city, after all, might more naturally be thought of as having itself a redemptive, or at least a protective quality, protecting us to some extent from the capricious and even hostile powers of the natural world. To take just one example of this, something we pretty much take for granted, the city has fought and has won a battle against the night. Against the night. Darkness curtails human activity. But in the city, the going down of the sun need not stop our bustling. And in many ways, the city comes into its own at night time. As Yi Fu Tuan reminds us, and I quote, "No city can claim to be cosmopolitan and glamorous without a vigorous nightlife." This is interesting. I recall flying over Nevada at nighttime, looking out of the window at the immense darkness below, and then being amazed when the intense, burning light of Las Vegas materialized. Now, those of you who have done, you must have done this drive from San Diego to Vegas at nighttime will also recognize this. You drive and you drive and you drive, and the impenetrable dark outside the car, the occasional sight of a ghostly Joshua tree rearing up by the side of the road, and then that astonishing explosion of light on the horizon getting ever closer until you enter the city itself. So much light, so much activity. Here, there is possibly then the greatest juxtaposition between the natural world of the desert, stark, still, silent, indifferent to human concerns, and the world of the city, centered on human beings, their needs and their enjoyments. And the contrast between the desert and the city is uppermost in those thinkers who have found in the desert a refuge from, or an antidote to, the felt superficiality or inauthenticity of city life. And this is a sentiment we see, for example, in both St. Jerome and much more recently in Edward Abbey. Now, for both of these figures, the city crushes the best and noblest aspects of the human soul, stifling us with its noise and its perpetual bustle. Once alone in the still and austere bareness of the desert, we can encounter the reality of things in themselves, what Abbey calls, a great phrase, the bare skeleton of being. And in this you encounter, crucially, the heart of yourself. The city is too full of distractions, so full of noise, so full of busy stuff, so full of people, that it robs you of the possibility of reflection and contemplation. There's this great Tom Waits song called "In the Neighborhood" with this line in it. My voice is so awful at the moment, I can almost approximate Tom Waits when I say it. There's always construction work bothering you. A great line for a song. St. Jerome says this: "To me, a town is a prison, and the desert loneliness a paradise." The desert, of course, for Jerome. He says the desert strips you bare. You become yourself more perfectly there in the desert. Now, sentiments of this kind flood the pages of Edward Abbey's classic book, Desert Solitaire. In its very first chapter, Abbey describes his first morning alone as a park ranger in Arches National Park. His descriptions of the silent beauty of the world in which he has found himself are consistently contrasted with what he sees as the empty trashiness of city life. For example, here's Abbey looking as brilliant as ever. This is when he emerges from his trailer on the first morning of his time in Arches. The sun is not yet in sight, but signs of the advent are plain to see. Lavender clouds sail like a fleet of ships across the pale green dawn. Each cloud, planed flat on the wind, has a base of fiery gold. Southeast, 20 miles by line of sight, stand the peaks of the Sierra La Sal, 12 to 13,000 feet above sea level, all covered with snow and rosy in the morning sunlight. He goes on, and thoughts of the human activity lying outside of his field of vision produce a characteristic Abbey-esque condemnation. The view is open and perfect in all directions except to the west, where the ground rises and skyline is only a few hundred yards away. On the north and northwest, I see the Rowan Cliffs and the Book Cliffs, the two-level face of the Uinta Plateau. Along the foot of those cliffs, maybe 30 miles off, Invisible from where I stand runs US 650, a major east-west artery of commerce, traffic, and rubbish. This is a great piece of writing, I think. And here we have that most Abbey-esque of distinctions, a distinction between the silent loveliness of the desert and the frenetic, cheap, human world of commerce, traffic, and rubbish. And this is the kind of opposition that we have encountered time and again in our landscape series. There is something stunting in city life and correspondingly something deep and revelatory in the wild. It is in these natural places that we truly find ourselves. Now, such a feeling, of course, lies at the core of Thoreau's famous retreat to the woods that everyone knows. You could say this all together. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Now, the dramatic idea uppermost in all these reflections, of course, is that life in the city is an impediment to realizing our full sense of self, our full humanity even. It is nature, and in its wildest and most sublime form, that you encounter what is most important in existence and in yourself. This is familiar to all of us who have attended these sessions over the past 2.5 years. So I want here just to note a couple of objections to this rather seductive view. Now, among the most famous of all the vocal defenders of city life was Samuel Johnson, a man whose devotion to London is reciprocated in the statues and plaques dotted all over that most incomparable city. Johnson's appreciation of the value of city living is neither rose-tinted nor generated by any unfamiliarity with the hard problems of an urban life. He had experienced great poverty and significant distress when he first relocated to London, and Johnson's raw awareness of the dark side of the city is uppermost in his first major work, a poem called London, composed in 1738. In this poem, Johnson evokes the simmering violence of the streets. Here we go. Prepare for death, if here at night you roam, and sign your will before you sup from home. Cruel with guilt and daring with despair, the midnight murderer bursts the faithless bar, invades the sacred hour of silent rest, and leaves, unseen, a dagger in your breast. Now, prominent and dramatic though violence and murder are, it is a more pervasive evil of the city that Johnson seeks to expose, the evil of poverty. So many poor folk in the city, Johnson writes, quote, live unregarded, unlamented die. Such is the grinding nature of poverty that it deadens the talents of the poor, making it hard, if not impossible, for them to rise out of their condition, thus producing the two most famous lines of Johnson's poem. This mournful truth is everywhere confessed. Slow rises worth by poverty depressed. It's great. Now, the poem ends with an exhortation to leave the city. Tired like me with follies and with crimes, the recommendation is to find some happier place. Quote, some peaceful vale with nature's paintings gay, This was advice that Johnson himself would not follow. When he temporarily left London to tour Scotland with James Boswell, he reflected on the allure of retiring from the bustle of the city and retreating to a slower, more bucolic place. He said, I quote, "I have thought of retiring and have talked of it to a friend, but I find my vocation is rather to active life." And it's precisely this active life that the city facilitates. And Johnson's greatest characterization of the activity of city life occurs, it seems to me, in this conversation recorded by Boswell in Boswell's great biographical work on the life of Johnson, which everyone should read to make your life better. Here's a lovely caricature of Boswell and Johnson, loved each other dearly. Boswell says this: "I talked of the cheerfulness of Fleet Street owing to the constant quick succession of people which we perceive passing through it." Johnson says, one of the great appearances of the word sir, which peppers Johnson's discourse, "Why, sir? Fleet Street has a very animated appearance, but I think the full tide of human existence is at Charing Cross." You don't need to worry about what Charing Cross is like. What you need to worry about is those words, the full tide of human existence. These are the words that promise perhaps the best defense of the city against those who think that it stunts us, against those who think that our humanity is best found in an immersion in the silence of the wild. Johnson's insight in these words is that the essence of being human is not to be found in solitude, but in company, and in a lot of it. We are not creatures made for solitude or isolation, but for conviviality and personal interaction. And the city offers us precisely this in abundance and in enormous variety. Johnson's philosophical tale, Rasselas, is full of expressions of admiration for what the city offers each of us in our quest for happiness and for meaning. And these notably are contrasted with the limited appeal of a natural environment. So this is a passage from Rasselas. "When I first entered upon the world of waters," he's on a boat, on a ship here, "and lost sight of land, I looked round me with pleasing terror, and thinking my soul enlarged by the boundless prospect, imagined that I could gaze round forever without satiety." I can never pronounce this word. Satiety. "But in a short time I grew weary of looking on barren uniformity, where I could only see again what I had already seen." Now we can see here that Johnson is using that familiar language of the natural sublime. Here you've got boundless and pleasing terror to describe the ocean. But the ocean, the prospect of the ocean, the sight and the feel of the ocean does not meet our human needs. It makes us weary. You can always note here as an aside Johnson's famous verdict about being on a ship. There's no romance to be had on a ship, he says. It's like, and I quote, "being in jail, but with the chance of drowning." This line comes to my mind whenever I think about what it must be like to be on a cruise ship or on semester at sea, which always seems like the worst possible experience anyone could have. Teaching with a chance of drowning. Better than the ocean, Johnson thinks, is the dry land. And of all dry lands, the city is the best. It is inhabited by men of different customs and contrary opinions, and I may hope to find variety in life, though I should miss it in nature. See, Johnson is thrilled by the diversity of manners, stations, and employments to be found in the city. And those of us who cherish city life will recognize that sentiment. The great diversity of cuisines, of neighborhoods with differing characters, histories, and cultures, all bespeaking that intoxicating and never stale diversity of manners. And the city offers us a multitude of places where people can gather, meet, and talk. The coffee house, the club, the restaurant, the bar, the meeting places in schools, colleges, libraries, churches. And at the beating heart of the city, there stands for Johnson that most pleasing of all things, the tavern. There's a great line about pub life. As soon as I enter the door of a tavern, I experience an oblivion of care and a freedom from solicitude. There is nothing which has yet been contrived by man by which so much happiness is produced as by a good tavern or inn. And here he is with Boswell. Here for Johnson and for many others is the key to being fully human: company, good conversation, the merriment of the public house, of drinking, of conversing with friends, meeting new people, making new friends, and so on. St. Jerome in the desert alone, he didn't get that. This is what the city gives us. When we want company, we can be in company. When we want to be alone, we can retreat. There are options in the city. He says, this again is from Rasselas, in a city it is possible to obtain at the same time the gratifications of society and the secrecy of solitude. Now, of course, maybe that is too upbeat an assessment. The city has for many people proved to be a very lonely place. And it's not as easy as it sounds just to turn on the faucet of company whenever one wishes. Here one thinks, of course, of that great painter of lonely city life, Edward Hopper. One example, one great example from Hopper about city loneliness. Still, it is good to be reminded of the benefits of city living, to correct the occasionally one-sided diet of the back-to-nature enthusiast. In truth, of course, the most wholesome way to proceed will not be to elevate one of these experiences at the expense of the other, but to see how each can, in its own fashion, produce in us inspiration and wonder. This, I take it, is the lesson lying at the heart of Walt Whitman's poem, Give Me the Splendid Silent Sun. Beautiful. Whitman initially lists some glorious features of nature. Give me the splendid silent sun with all his beams full dazzling. Give me juicy autumnal fruit, ripe and red and from the orchard. Give me a field where the unmowed grass grows. Give me an arbor. Give me the trellised grape. Give me fresh corn and wheat. Give me serene moving animals teaching content. Give me nights perfectly quiet as on high plateaus west of the Mississippi, and I, looking up at the stars. Give me solitude. Give me nature. Give me again, O nature, your primal sanities. But even with those soul-nourishing delights recognized, Whitman still succumbs to the allure of the city. Still I adhere to the city, he writes, and produces next this enraptured hymn of praise to the city. Keep your splendid silent sun. Keep your woods, O nature, and the quiet places by the woods. Give me faces and streets. Give me these phantoms, incessant and endless along the trottoirs, the sidewalks. Give me interminable eyes. Give me women. Give me comrades and lovers by the thousand. Let me see new ones every day. Let me hold new ones by the hand every day. Give me such shows. Give me the streets of Manhattan. So with our eyes open to this is gorgeous, gorgeous stuff, of course. With our eyes open to its wonders, we can approach the city not as something in opposition to the sublime, but as itself embodying perhaps a variety of it. This sentiment is expressed by the architectural critic Ada Louise Huxtable, reflecting on her time as a student in Rome and seeing that city's churches and plazas bathed in moonlight. She says, I had no idea at the time that cities could be so devastatingly beautiful, that stone could be so sensuous, that architects dealt in such sublime stage sets for human drama, that space could move one to such strong emotions, that architecture could make men so much larger than life. So with that nice sentiment, we have the stage set for this semester's exploration of the city. And I am really very happy to welcome up here now the first of our speakers in this series, offering his thoughts on the character of the city. Please welcome to the Humanities Center, Dr. Cid Martinez.
All right, it's wonderful to be here. I want to thank Brian for the invitation. I kept bumping into him on the bottom floor here of the building, and every time he saw me, I was carrying a Gramsci book, Antonio Gramsci, and I think he said something to the effect that you would be disappointed if I wasn't carrying Gramsci. Anyway, that's what started the conversation, and I think how I ended up here. I'm not sure. Today I'm going to be talking about trust. Most police departments and chiefs of police like to talk about building trust. As a matter of fact, when we got the new chief of police here in San Diego, the first thing they asked him was, well, what do you want to do? And he says, well, I want to build trust. So it's a very common thing that you hear from law enforcement. So today I'm going to be focusing on two questions. The first question is, how much do residents trust the police? And more importantly, the second question, which I think has lots of significance, or is actually more significant in some ways, how much do police trust residents in disadvantaged neighborhoods? That's a question we typically don't hear much about. And in doing so, I'm going to invoke a concept from my first book known as alternative governance. I'm not going to go into it too much because of time constraints, but I'm going to be using this concept to animate a video we're going to watch at the end of this presentation. Let me just define now what I mean by alternative governance. Alternative governance, as I develop in my book, refers to the creative strategies that residents utilize to maximize their safety and security. Okay. The second thing I'm going to do today, I'll just try to give an outline like I do in my classes so students know what the main points are, is I'm going to emphasize that there's something missing. So in my first book, I talked about the distrust of residents, that alternative governance gave rise to distrust of mainstream institutions, in particular the police. But there was something that was under-theorized, and that was the role of institutional trust, and more specifically, the significance of police trust. So that's going to be a major theme today. And then finally, we'll end today with a short documentary video based on my ethnographic research that looks at how alternative governance can be leveraged by residents. So I have here an image of St. Peter Claver. He is the patron saint of slaves, of African Americans. He represents interracial justice, and Claver is considered a model of Christian love in human rights. This is a mural from the Catholic Church, a Catholic church where I did my fieldwork in South LA, and where I spent a lot of time doing my fieldwork. And the image is important. It's significant because it represents one of these social spaces where people go outside the law for security and to deal with conflict. If you were to see the rest of this wall, so this is a mural on the back of the church, and if you look further along the wall, you'll see a picture of Cesar Chavez, and you see all sorts of other Mexican-American important figures as well. So one of the things that I want to start with today is, why do we get alternative governance? What is the source of alternative governance? And there's two things that I want to emphasize. First, there is a long history of criminalization and police abuse and misconduct in this country. My work is focused on South LA, and if you want to center the analysis in South LA, we know what happened in 1960. What's the evidence for this? 1965, one of the most important moments of civil unrest. 1992, the civil unrest there. And I would say more recently, the protests that emerged after the killing of George Floyd. All of these moments represent the criminalization and sort of the motivation for not working with the law. But there's something else that gets lost in the story, and that is access to meaningful political participation. So early on, if we compare the experience of European ethnics in the first third of the 20th century, European ethnics from Ireland and from Italy had access to political machines. And machines were important because they provided jobs for immigrants. In return, people were expected to vote the slate of the candidates on the machine, right? So that meant the mayor, that meant the DA, that meant the prosecutor were all intimately connected to the machine. And so what you get a form of soft social capital where victims, perpetrators, police officers, judges, DAs are all intimately connected, and you get a criminal justice system that tends to be lenient, more fair, and there's an incentive for people not to commit crime because there's accountability. When we look at the experience of African Americans and Latinos, they did not have access to that kind of political infrastructure. The reform movement emerges in the late 19th century, and the reform movement was about rooting out corruption, right? And so by the time we get to the 1960s and the full maturation of black ghettos, the machines are gone. And the other thing that I think that gets lost in the story, and this is kind of the work of the great urban historian Robert Fogelson, is that machines, because they were subject to political influence, the reform movement wanted to make sure that police departments could not be compromised by political interference. So you get political institutions, specifically policing, that is insulated from the public, that allows for no channels for meaningful political participation. And in my research, this is one of the reasons why you get alternative governance in places like Los Angeles. I wish I had more time to talk about my book, but I'm more interested in talking about my new work that draws on this. Just very briefly, what I try to spell out in my first work is how the failure of the state to protect people, to provide security, creates alternative governance, and we see it in religious institutions and in street life. And I gave a couple of talks a long time ago on that relationship. Go a little further here. So let's start with the first question. What does police trust of residents look like in your neighborhood? And so many view the distrust of police and city government as a central factor in producing crime. And the thinking goes something like this: if Black and Latino residents would just trust the police more, that this would solve the problems, right? But I want to suggest, building on my new work, that there has been a major oversight by scholars in their failure to examine how mainstream institutions, in particular police distrust, is also a factor that needs to be explored. And so what I want to suggest here is that trust is a two-way street. We've put a lot of burden on communities of color to trust the police, and we haven't asked, what does police trust look like? So policing and the perspective of police matters as well. Okay, I'm mostly talking about police here, but recent work by Loïc Vaquant, an urban sociologist, he makes the point that we need to start thinking of the jail and police as core urban institutions. Typically, when we have discussions like this, maybe criminologists talk about these issues, but urban scholars are increasingly recognizing that the jail and policing are core urban institutions. As Vaquant argues, practitioners of urban studies in their broadest definitions have yet to notice the signal urban institution hiding in plain sight. And so for me, it's not just the jails, but policing as well. After all, who arrests people to put them in jail, right? So we have to look at the role of policing too. More specifically, jails and prisons, jails and police matter because police are regulating the way in which people are able to maneuver in and out of neighborhoods. They regulate bodies in social space, so to speak. And one statistic that I thought was really interesting was that jails process some 10 million bodies each year, 20 times more than people that serve in prison. So it turns out that jails have a lot of influence in what happens in urban neighborhoods. All right, so moving on here. One of the things that I did for this book is I did some ethnographic field work with a community policing program. It wasn't enough for me just to observe, so I actually got involved and I volunteered. And my role was to kind of work as a social worker in this community policing program. So I served in the program for over 2 years. The program was designed to address gang violence and build trust with residents. And so the program consists, you can sort of think of a triangle with the police, black clergy, and social services. So it was the collaboration between these three institutions or organizations that would go out and do these interventions. And building trust was really important because for many police departments that work in urban areas, they don't exactly have the best reputation, and it makes their work very difficult, even when it comes to pulling people over. I know after the George Floyd incident, officers told me if they pulled someone over in Southeast San Diego, people would surround them and would start filming them. So some basic things that police need to do are a problem when your reputation has been compromised. So here's a quote from the chief. I did an interview with the chief, and he says, you know, you saturate patrol, but that comes at a cost to the community. So it's almost like we're put in a role where we're the bad guy. And so this community policing program that I was involved in was important because not only was it designed to do outreach, but the goal was to have the clergy vouch for the police, to improve their reputation so that police could have access to neighborhoods and people that otherwise would be off limits. So the question is, what was the default outlook of police? And so the first thing that I noticed when I went out there, and this is actually, I took a lot of video and photographs when I was out there, the default category that most police officers have of people in disadvantaged Black and Latino neighborhoods is that they're dangerous. And this fact is established by the historian Khalil Muhammad. He says, you know, Black folks could have been, they could have had an identity in all sorts of different ways, but the overriding identity that characterizes Black folks in America is dangerous, right? And so I saw iterations of this in my field work. If you were classified as being in a gang, arrested, associated with gun violence, on parole, probation, lived in a bad neighborhood, all of those things immediately got you categorized as a risky, dangerous person. So from the outset, the point I want to emphasize here is the categorization of danger immediately put police in this default look of distrust towards residents. And just to be clear, the officers that I worked with, they served two roles. The first role, the primary role they served was in a gang suppression unit, which is probably the most suppression-oriented unit in the police department below the SWAT team. But then they wore the other hat of being involved in this community policing program. So I saw them wearing different hats when I was out in the field observing them. So in addition to categories of dangerousness, which makes me wonder about their view of how much they trust residents, there were other problems. And one of the things that happened is that we would go out and do interventions initially in jails. So if people were being detained, we would go in and do interventions. We would go into hospitals. We would go into schools. And these are incidences where we were working with people who were involved in gun violence and were known to be gang affiliated. And so the clergy, because of their standing in the community, they were able to use their reputation and connect with people in a way that the police weren't. They were able to establish some semblance of trust during these interventions. And so I interviewed as many people from the program as I could, since I worked closely with them, and this view that I'm about to read was not uncommon. So I asked him, you know, what do you think about, how much do you trust the police? Do the police trust you? And he says, well, you know, the police had asked me, you know, hey, we need to get information about this guy. So I ended up happening to know the gentleman because his mom went to church with me, and he used to go to our church when he was a lot younger. And so then the police, they told me, hey, we'll see if you can get some information in reference to what he's dealing with in reference to his drug thing. And so I'm looking like, really? You want me to pump him for that? So already the fact that the clergy felt that they were being asked to collect intelligence and information on people made the clergy feel uncomfortable. It illustrates how officers were willing to use the outreach events to gain intelligence for investigative purposes. And the pastor's comments also reveal how using outreach intervention undermined the credibility of the clergy and potentially put individuals at risk. So I'm out in the field. I'm seeing a lot of this, and so I'm trying to make sense of what the reason for this program is. If police don't seem to trust people, what is maybe the motive for doing this? And this is kind of an idea that I'm still developing. But I suspect, here I'm thinking of the work of Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci makes the point that in modern society, rule cannot occur by force alone. That as a matter of fact, to use force, force requires consent. You can only rule by using consent and then use force. So building on this insight, I suggest that trust plays an important role in producing consent so that people are willingly participating in the police interrogations and investigations. This wasn't quite what I was looking for. I was looking for a deeper sociological, philosophical understanding of trust, and instead I found more of a utility of how trust was being utilized. And I want to say what's a little different about my argument here. It's not just straight up Gramsci. What I'm trying to illustrate is that trust is the bridge between consent and force. And I think that part has not quite hasn't been quite developed in the literature. Okay, getting ready to wrap it up here. But, as an ethnographer, we always have these conversations with other academics in terms of how can we generalize and draw conclusions? Or as one of my mentors, Aaron Sickerell, he founded the UC San Diego Sociology Department, he'd look at me and say, how do you know this? And so what I feel confident in this study is that I went out after this and surveyed residents, and I surveyed the police department. And so I was able to kind of match my ethnographic data with the survey data. And so what we did is we went out, we conducted a survey of nearly 1,200 residents, which I think is a pretty good sample size. And we did a census of 500 police officers, which is unheard of. We had an over 60% response rate from the police department. So let me start with the survey for the community. So less than, let me see. There we go. We surveyed the community. Less than half of residents, 44%, say they have complete or quite a bit of trust. These numbers were noticeably lower in distressed neighborhoods where Black and Latino residents reside. So the numbers were a lot lower. So these are just sort of aggregate numbers that I'm showing here. But what was really alarming for me is when we surveyed the police, and again, we surveyed 60% of officers out of about 650. 0% said they had complete trust, and only 17% said they have quite a bit of trust. And the main point that I want to emphasize here, and I think this is overlooked and missing in lots of the sociological research, when we compare trust levels between the police and residents, there is a sharp contrast. Police trust communities less than communities trust them. And I want to suggest that, if we're going to talk about trust in a serious way, trust is a two-way street, and we must reconsider the use of police because of the potential harm that can come as a result. So where I want to end here with a little documentary from my ethnographic research is how can we expect the police to live up to the promise of protecting Black and brown folks given the institutional distrust that I've sort of documented in my work.
The most important thing is for us to heal the neighborhoods, like for us to bring back a sense of pride to our communities and, of worth to the people that's been left behind. we're generally looked at as throwaways, like we're not even worth it. But we at Advanced Peace feel nobody left behind. You know, everybody's worth it. You don't just throw a kid away because he got in trouble or has a record. I mean, everybody has redeemable values. So in that sense, that's the most important thing for the job. We know or anything, but one of our NCAs said he was there already, so we just tapped in, see if he needed assistance, because it was, shoot, what, 10:30, 11 or something like that at night. It was pretty late, and you know, we 24/7 on call, but our hours are 12 to 8, but you got to be available if something happens. You know, we go to the hospitals, like visits and all that, check on people, their families. In any situation, we go to the scene, whatever is called for. The objective and the prayer is to stifle the gang wars. So we don't want to show up at no scenes. You know, we wanted to where the people that were previously having these issues, we could mentor them and build them up to be productive.
They're gonna eat you up for real, for real. And now these are the pressures that they can speak to. Like, I've had that pressure where I may not even view this as a situation that's worth going to war. But I got all kind of people that they got expectations of me, and like Jimmy said, the pressures of the culture to respond in a violent manner. And that's what they up against. Because if you don't have someone like a Clem, Ezel, a Rich, or Jimmy to help you redefine what manhood is, the streets will tell you what it is to be a man. I was talking to a childhood friend, and I was like, man, what were we thinking as fathers when we got 3 kids and we out here in the streets risking our lives and our freedom every single day? And he said, man, we wasn't thinking as fathers. We wasn't thinking at all as fathers. And I was like,
that's being selfish.
Exactly, but do we view it as...
The struggles of being a peacemaker is you take on the problems of the community. Every little thing that happens, we have to hear about, we have to deal with. And you know, you got to stay committed to it, you know, but I choose to take on this burden because I want better for my community. The object is to bring peace back to the whole world, but I'll start with my city, Sacramento.
Okay, so where I want to end with is that recently a panel of experts from the National Academy of Sciences convened to uncover or discover ways to reduce harm in Black and Latino communities when it comes to policing. And they all agreed, it was unanimous, that community-led alternatives are a viable alternative to policing. And so this is what this is an example of. That's it for me. Thank you.